The Girl in the Basement. As Jeanette tried to decipher her mother's moves throughout her life, the girl in the basement is the one constant that never leaves Jeanette's mind. Sure, she learned coping skills from her therapist, and she confided in her husband at the time, who tried to better understand her challenges.
When you said girl in the basement, because I know she's had the experience of this girl that's in a trash bag, I want to say, and so she was always speculating whether there was some foul play from either her dad or her mom that may have killed someone.
Matt was helpful to me. He answered all my questions, but admitted up front his memory isn't very good. I asked Jeanette's dear friend, Rick, if he knew about the girl in the basement. No. I asked her lifelong friend, Rayanne, if she was ever told about the girl in the basement.
No. I have no idea what you're talking about.
I asked Rayanne if she was curious, if she wanted me to tell her anything about it.
You know what? I'm going to say no. I'll wait till that one comes out by itself.
Yeah, I get it. I wish I could erase it from my mind. Jeanette says her dad had a lingering threat.
He said, well, when I die, I will haunt you. I will always be there. And if you ever say anything bad about me, I'll know right away. I will always know. So that's why I keep a real firm barrier up between me and any feelings of anything else, because I am not going to lose my sanity over some raving lunatic's rants to me as a child. It's not going to happen.
Previously on The Toll. Poison. Control.
And she goes, oh, this is happening much faster than I thought.
And he said, I just don't feel right.
Somebody poisoned her, that's for sure, but we just can't prove it.
No, who would do that? Only a crazy person would think you're being poisoned, really. I mean, I didn't think that.
He wasn't just on top of the world, happy-go-lucky, big smile genie at all.
I'm an award-winning journalist who has spent decades chasing stories and investigating cases across the Ozarks. It's tragic, really.
I don't believe in coincidence.
We all have a story.
Nobody was able to make it because everybody was sick.
A dark secret wrapped in emptiness and regret.
Within a year, her entire nuclear family died.
You know.
Tons and tons of chemicals.
The Toll. I'm Nancy Simpson. We sent off several FOIAs, Freedom of Information Act requests, to the FBI. I sent the initial round, and one came back on me. Not sure how or why that happened, but it came back clear. This Nancy Simpson wasn't in the system. Shoo. What that gave me, though, was a measuring stick to compare with what was to come. The others, husband number 1, 2, and 3, denied. Couldn't confirm or deny these people were part of an investigation. And maybe if they were in the system, there were medical files that needed to be kept private, would violate privacy laws. Okay, so definitely in the system, or we'd gotten a letter that looked like mine, right? Okay, Jeanette's turn. She's family. She sent off a round of FOIAs. The FBI gave us mumbo-jumbo on her dad, no-go on Bruce, husband number 3, but bingo on Roy Forgy. They approved some FOIA papers on Roy, a.k.a. husband number 2. We wait. Months. Then, on some random Tuesday in March 2022, we got him. So what Clint, Roy's son, was told wasn't exactly correct, but here's what we can glean from these papers. The U.S. Department of Justice, the FBI in Quantico, Virginia, formally requested samples to be taken from Roy's body on the day he died, September 28, 2009, so they were watching. Iowa Department of Public Health's letter showed the samples were overnighted October 16th. July 2010, 9 months later, test results from the FBI lab are sent off to the Iowa State Medical Examiner, sharing their findings. Liver samples, left kidney samples. Remember, he had kidney cancer at the end. Left and right hand fingernail clippings, that's in there, and a pulled hair sample. They were all listed. The results were negative for all on arsenic. Liver and kidney were screened for mercury, and those were negative. A quick search shows arsenic is out of your system in 6 to 12 months. Mercury takes much longer, but still, he'd been away from Jeanne for a decade. Did they request the bad kidney, hoping there'd be something lingering there? The last line, though, says, "The remainder of the submitted evidence will be returned under separate cover of communication." So there's more? Yes? More mumbo-jumbo explaining that some of the documents would invade privacy and could give away their secrets, techniques, procedures, stuff like that. But here's what wasn't redacted, blanked out. In the title portion from the FBI to the medical examiner, it has Dennis Spriggs, and then in parentheses, deceased, and then victim. And then it says et al., which means and others, and then under that, serial killings. All caps. Dennis Spriggs is Jeanette's dad. I believed Jeanette that this all played out. There was never a doubt. She's turned over so much and answers any question I ask, and I mean any. I have emails from an FBI agent to her. I have emails from her private investigator outlining procedures. I have emails from Jeanne to Jeanette complaining about her polygraph and upset the FBI is looking into the deaths. I have all that. And yet, seeing this from the FBI, linking Dennis, Jeanette's dad, and others as part of a real serial killing investigation, just wow. We'll keep trying for more papers from the FBI, but this little nugget, I call this little nugget a win. Dennis Spriggs, Jeanne's first husband and the father of her 4 children. Jeanette's dad. In Jeanne's writing, she tells about Dennis's early days growing up poor, living in a shack near Kirksville, Missouri, and carrying water. Billy was born and then Dennis in 1945. Harold, their father, dabbled in boxing, got a good union job, and drank in the early years. Billy was 7 years older than his brother Dennis and killed himself over a girl. Some stories say a fight with their dad was in the mix, too. Through the dozens of paper clippings I gathered from online, I found this. William Spriggs, 17-year-old honor student at Kirksville High School, died today of a .22 caliber bullet wound in his head. It goes on to say the rifle was at his side. Quote, Coroner Robert B. Davis said he had not decided whether to call an inquest. So it appears, at least initially, there was concern over foul play. Dennis was 10 and had lost his hero. Something to take note of. The family was broken. Jeanne described Dennis's life in school after the death: combative, fistfights, average student who quit trying. Excelled in track and loved a job he took at 15 in road construction. His family moved from house to house in Kirksville. According to writings by Jeanne, Dennis proposed to a girl he loved on her wedding day, and she said no. In Jeanne's history papers, she writes about a previous relationship of her own. It says, Earl and I fought pretty often, especially about what was appropriate to do before we were married. That was Memorial Day weekend, and he was to come to LaBelle for my birthday on July 4th, the year I turned 19, and present me with an engagement ring. He simply did not call, write, or show up, and our engagement ended. Jeanne and Dennis both attended Northeast Missouri State University after high school. Jeanne, from LaBelle, Missouri, graduated as an English major in just 2 years. Dennis, from nearby Kirksville, Missouri, got his degree in English as well. She writes about Dennis working really hard in college and being fiercely competitive. Jeanne and Dennis got married right after graduating college. Jeanne's mom made all the dresses. A simple wedding with Great Aunt Ruth making the cake and flowers gathered from gardens around LaBelle. Her dad was supposed to be the photographer, but he was so nervous he put the film in the wrong way. Pictures from guests made up their little wedding album. In other writings, Jeanne points out Dennis, her husband, loved tricking and double tricking everyone. Something that's a theme. It comes into play later. Both Dennis and Jeanne's birthdays are on July 4th, something everyone, even a local paper once, found cute and quirky. After getting married, off they went to Iowa to teach at a high school. Dennis and Jeanne have their first baby, Jeanette, October 17th. Teaching stopped for Jeanne. Dennis took a teaching job in Fulton, Missouri. They had moved in with his parents for the summer. He then decided he wanted to get his master's at the University of Missouri, studying philosophy. He talked the school board into hiring Jeanne to take over the rest of the semester. Dennis had been fighting with the school anyway over his mustache, which was against dress code. Jeanne got pregnant with their second daughter. They moved in with Dennis's parents again for the summer of 1969. Jeanne started taking classes toward a master's degree, but she says Dennis couldn't find a job, a little construction, but that's it. He answered an ad in the paper. She writes, "Looking back, I wish with all my heart that he had never seen that ad, because it was for combined insurance, and he got the job, and it changed us forever. It was life insurance, door to door."
Stopped teaching school in order to be able to support the family a little bit better, and went into selling insurance, and made a little bit more money, but it was kind of a mistake as far as our lifestyle was concerned, because instead of being able to be the stay-at-home dad that he wanted to be, he ended up having to be an on-the-road salesman.
That is rough.
And so while the kids were little, he wasn't at home very much.
Mm-hmm.
And so he mostly just came home when he could, Wednesday nights, weekends, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Troubles within the company and financial troubles for the young couple started piling on almost immediately, she writes. Jeanne says Dennis was gone for long periods at a time, and long-distance phone calls were too expensive. It was the 1970s. A long series of moves are to come, and I mean a lot of moving. Maybe in the beginning it started because Dennis had to move territories with a job. Later, Jeanette, their oldest daughter, says it was because they couldn't or wouldn't pay rent. 3 months in, 3 months under eviction, and then out. Trying to put together this timeline was tough. Took me a couple of 3 years, and I'm still adding to it. After teaching in Iowa, it's Kirksville, Fulton, Columbia, Boonville. Dennis gets Monette territory in the southwest part of the state, but the family doesn't move. And then it's Clinton, Jefferson City, Moberly, and Holt Summit. That's the girl in the basement time. All towns in Missouri, which brings us up to 1973, where we're going to settle for a minute. They moved well over a dozen times, not including out west when the kids get older for college. Moving for jobs, skipping out on rent, help from the church would dry up. Jeanette says that was a big one. Okay, but still, I just can't help but think, was there something else? That is a lot of disruption. Small kids, it's expensive. Moving can be really hard on a family. This really stands out to me, and it's a pattern. Okay, back to 1973, Holt Summit in northern Missouri, where they lived for a couple of years. Denise, their third daughter, is born. Jeanne, the mom, talks about how good life is here for them in Holt Summit, Missouri. She says she felt settled, made friends in the neighborhood, and joined a women's club, theater, and taught Bible school at church. She says buying the house in Holt Summit was the most successful time in their marriage. Jeanette says early on some of her fondest moments with her mom, they come from this time frame too. Around 5, her mom is attentive, kind, would take time brushing her hair and caring for Jeanette. Jeanne, the mom, had a couple of little jobs and was giving piano lessons at the house. Dennis wasn't home a lot, but when he popped in, he could be the fun dad. Her dad, the trickster, would also do things like hide in their rooms, in their closets, and scare them. Hide under the bed and grab them. Jeanette wrote a memory. It says in part, "After a lengthy ordeal of scaring and screaming and begging him to leave us alone, I remember lying very still and staring toward the foot of my bed where the door was so I could see if he reappeared, crawling into my room. All of a sudden, a huge hand landed full force on my forehead and my face from the end of the bed. I was so scared I couldn't breathe. After what seemed like forever, The hand slid backwards off my head and behind the bed. I waited a couple of minutes so I could breathe, jumped off my bed, and ran into the room where my dad was sitting reading a book with my mother. I was simply hysterical, demanding to know if my dad had been in the bedroom because someone just grabbed my head. My dad looked up calmly and said he'd been sitting there right beside my mother and had done no such thing. My mother vouched for his whereabouts. Those stories stick at 5. In later years, she wondered what else Jeanne had covered for Dennis. Jeanne writes, I'm sorry if you have bad memories of Holt Summit because it was one of the best, most peaceful, happy places we ever lived and one of the happiest of our marriage. Those early years, grade school, when Jeanette and her sister were rushed to the hospital, tubes going down their throats, the "Mommy, but we shared a bottle of pills" story, that goes in here somewhere. So does the time Jeanette was caught by her great-grandmother playing in rat poison at her mother's feet, so the story goes. It's fragmented in Jeanette's mind, vague recollections and stories from her mom, as she told others later on. Combined Insurance offered Dennis a spot in Moberly, and they moved there again, where Jeanne seemed defeated. She wrote that there was no point in settling or making friends. Dennis was transferred again, and 10 months later they moved to Cameron, Missouri. Jeanne writes that the girls lost their friends and social life with no neighbors. Jeanette remembers her mom was distracted and busy now. Not a lot of time like before. Jeanne, the mom, says she had no friends, didn't go to church or have babysitters, and Dennis was gone for months with few visits. She's got 3 little girls by now, living in a couple of trailers, building a house in Cameron. I'm sure it's really hectic. It seems like there was a switch here, though. Like something changed. Jeanette spent 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade here, in Cameron, Missouri. They built a house, and Will, Jeanne and Dennis's son, was born just weeks before the move. Discussing the design, her sister Chris wanted 4 windows for her room, not Jeanette. She says she begged for no windows, but safety regulations required 1, so 1 it was. Jeanette says she was terrified of windows. Pulling out her eyelashes, her sister Chris staring at the sun trying to blind herself. That all goes here. Jeanette can remember on 2 occasions women moved in with the family in those early years. One, Jeanne writes, was the backup babysitter in Holt Summit after the first one, Brenda, got into a terrible car crash and was disfigured. Jeanette later asked her mom about this girl, and her mom blew her off, saying the teenager was just some drug addict who ran away. A different woman who moved in had worked with Dennis at Combined Insurance in Cameron. This woman stayed in Chris's room, so Chris moved in with Jeanette, which she loved. Having her sister there close made her feel safer at night. In an email from 2013, Jeanne says the backup babysitter was, quote, one of the only people who ever stayed with us who never did work at Combined Insurance. So she's saying there were more than these 2 women who moved in? Jeanette kept pressing about the babysitter in Holt's Summit. She asks her mom in an email, you never really cleared that up for me from the email where I wrote and you said that Dad made out with anything that moved. Was she one of those anything that moved people? Same email thread, Jeanette writes, one time you said to me, your dad was very controlling in every aspect of our relationship, including the bedroom, and I need to talk to someone, but not to you. Jeanne shoots back, I do remember that one occasion and saying that to you, but it was inappropriate to discuss that with you then and also now. As far as my conversation with anyone, they were always superficial and never about family or personal matters. Maybe I should have opened up to someone. Maybe I just wasn't the type. I still never cry. Jeanne, the mom, wrote that. I'm not addressing these things to embarrass the family. If Jeanne is accused of poisoning Dennis, her first husband, then I need to point out things I find in these stacks and stacks of emails. Dennis, throughout their marriage, is making out with other women, moving some of them into their homes, peeking in on their children during private moments. These things would wear on most any mother. I'm pointing out possible tipping points, not making excuses for either side. Jeanette once said to me, I don't want my mom to hide behind my crazy dad. It stuck with me so much that I keep it on a Post-it note at my desk. Crappy cars and crashes, they were a big part of Jeanne's overall stories and emails and her writings, those history papers. During her talk with the private investigator, she brought it up. Now, this is still under the whole "tell me about yourself" segment. She just brings it up. And to be fair, having 4 little kids and no car if Dennis was away, or an unreliable car, will stick out. You're stuck or dependent on others at all times. But this topic, it's covered a lot.
We had a whole series of cars that didn't work very well. Sometimes when you don't have much money or much credit, you end up getting into a situation where it's, do you fix the old car or do you get a different car? And, you know, your car breaks down and it's like, well, which do you do? And so you say, well, yeah, okay, well, let's see, which do we do? And you have to weigh it one way or the other. And so it's like, oh, okay, well, fine. This time we'll fix the old car. Next time we'll get a different old car. And so, you know, we just had kind of a series of loser cars. And she resented our series of loser cars that we drove.
A man Dennis worked with at the insurance company introduced them to the Mormon religion. And then Dennis took a trip to the LDS Visitor Center in Independence. Jeanne and Dennis got baptized into the Mormon religion February 12th, 1977, her telling the story during the interview with the private investigator.
We joined the church and we joined into a little branch that met in the house. And I was the only person that could play the piano with both hands. But we just, it was exactly what we'd been looking for. My husband found the true church and that he had been looking for all of his life. And he really was a very religious man.
While living in Cameron, Jeanne says things were looking up. Both had decent cars, $8,000 in the bank. Dennis was a district manager with good pay. And then he quit. He quit insurance and started selling smoke detectors. Good at first, but then hardware stores started selling cheaper ones and their $8,000 investment went downhill. Jeanne says right about the time they joined the church was the beginning of everything going downhill. She writes about flipping their station wagon headed to St. Joseph, Missouri to return empty pop bottles. Their little boy was 9 months old. Denise, second to youngest, was in the front seat. Jeanette, the oldest, didn't go on this trip. Jeanne writes she prayed for safety, first time she'd ever done that before any trip, right here, and then took off for the 35-mile trek. She says she reached back to help the baby with a bottle, went off the road, yanked the wheel, and rolled, landing on its top. She writes, a deputy sheriff found them bleeding alongside the road of the highway and took them to the hospital. 1977. Denise, the young sister, had a cracked cheekbone. They all had cuts and bruises, and the baby had a concussion. The crash happened Tuesday, released Wednesday, and Jeanette fell out of a tree and broke both bones in her arm on Thursday. Dennis had just started back at the traveling insurance job and was stationed at Lake of the Ozarks. Insurance hadn't kicked in yet, so there was loads of debt racking up here. They bought an orange van that was hard for Jeanne to drive. She writes, were these little trials because we had joined the church? Sometimes we wondered. The timing was perfect. Dennis's job is up and down, so many moves. Money was good in Cameron and then bad, according to Jeanne. Dennis suddenly quit his job and bought a house on the outskirts of Kirksville. Jeanne says she didn't understand this decision, but went along with it. It'd be closer to his parents, and they're both dreamers. she wrote. But this house in Kirksville, out in the country in an area known as Spring Lake, well, Jeanette says really what they bought was the bottom floor of a house. The top half had been burned out, leaving a patch job that leaked in rain and snow. Jeanette, Jeannie and Dennis's oldest daughter, says this is some rock bottom stuff here, physically and mentally for their family. Jeannie, the mom, started working. Dennis would sell insurance from time to time, but was home a lot.
We lived in a burnt-down house. The top floor had burned. And so when we moved to Kirksville, we lived way out in the sticks. And a lot of the times we had no hot water. And most of the time we had no phone. We had lights most of the time. We had these things they called the Uggy Uggies growing in the front yard. And it was the sewer that had come up, and the dogs would just trample around. We had 6 dogs that would run through the house with fleas. When I turned 9, he said, "You are now in charge. You are in charge of all the family cooking, all the family cleaning, and your brothers and sisters," who were at that time aged 8, 4, and 6 months. And so if I did anything wrong, like if I left egg on a plate, and we didn't have hot water, so I boil water, then I would get screamed at for hours. And this went on a regular basis. So I would go in and he would be writing a note with whichever hand, and then he'd say, "We need to have a talk." And so he'd pull me in and he would say, "I didn't like the way that you looked sideways at me during this time," or whatever. And it would go on for screaming. And one time when my mother was sitting there, I said, "Look at this man. Help me." Because he was screaming so loud, there was like spit coming on my face. It was terrifying. And she said, "This is between you guys. I can't do anything with it." And she never once helped me. She stayed in her room.
Jeanette says she just didn't understand why 2 college graduates were living like this.
We all had to share the same room, thankfully, in a way, and there was no door on it, and there were no windows. It was all cemented off. And so the house, because it was from a burned down house, every time it would rain, the roof was flat, and the rain would just come in. So we'd have to bail water whenever it would rain or snow. So we'd get our towels out, and we would just bail water. I remember one time waking up, and the water was, many inches in our uncarpeted room, and a mouse went floating by, a dead mouse.
Jeannie doesn't disagree in her talk with a private investigator.
We were beginning to hit a real downward spiral in terms of finances, and Dennis in terms of employment. And shortly after that, then I hadn't been employed full-time for several years. And so I became employed full-time. And he messed around with being employed, self-employed for a while, and employed with a couple of different insurance companies, and just nothing really worked out for him. And he really, looking back at it, I can say he entered a period of real depression, not knowing what was going on, not having any knowledge of that sort of thing. I didn't know what was going on either.
Mm-hmm. She says for sure the dynamics in the house changed.
When I became employed, Daddy decided that the best way to help me was that he would help me at home. He would help with raising the kids. And so about that time was when Jeanette was beginning to enter into early teenage years and so on. And so he decided to really become the disciplined person. Well, previous to this, he'd been gone a lot, and he'd been the fun dad. And all of a sudden, when I went to work, he became the disciplined dad.
Jeannie, the mom, says the change in Dennis, her husband, it was apparent to everyone in the house.
And then they saw him not really helping at home. This depression a lot of times was causing him to sleep during the day. And I would make big breakfast for everybody. I felt that was about the only time of day that, we were definitely all together, and so I wanted to make big breakfasts and, have everybody have good breakfast together.
Jeanette talks about making trips outside the home to take showers. Jeannie talks about this to the private investigator, too.
We had a little membership in a club, a sports club. And yes, it's true, we did not have hot water in our house for 2 years. And because we had this huge propane tank, and we weren't heating with propane anymore. And we were heating with wood, and we couldn't afford to fill the stupid propane tank. And that's what our hot water heater ran on, was propane. And so we took our showers and everything in at this sports club. And so it was inconvenient, but nobody went without showers. And,
Jeanette says her mom was taking prescription pills, sometimes more than others. She would stay in her bedroom a lot. Growing up, Jeanette says she saw bottles of pills that belonged to her mom. Jeanette says there were times her dad's paranoia ran deep.
The Good Deed Group. I had started a club because we were out. I was in charge of these people. Every day we had make and do activities. We did a lot of crafts. I taught them how to read. I was their mother. So I said, let's do a good deed group, and then we'll just go around. We didn't really have neighbors because we were out in the middle of nowhere, but one that lived half a mile away. And in the winter, in the summers, we had this one. Let's do good deeds for people, and let's do good deeds for our parents. So I was about 11 when we had the Good Deed Group. Started it in our closet on a card table. We made the bed for my parents and cleaned up their room and put Love the Good Deed Group. And my father said, get in here. He goes, what's this Good Deed Group? And he grilled me about it, and he said, you are building a mastermind alliance against me. You will disband this club now. I don't know what you're talking about in there, but it's not happening. Get that down now. So I was forbidden to have it.
So no money for hot water, lights at times, phone at times, not enough food at times. It's all a challenge. I see the Mormon Church helped quite a bit here. Jeanette thinks it may have made converting more appealing.
They joined the church when I was 9 years old, and they said that their financial issues started more after that time, which I saw to be true also, knowing that I was only 9. But once we moved to Kirksville, or back to Kirksville, is when they started having deeper financial issues, and the church would come and bring food. We would go wax the church benches and stuff on the weekends, like we kids would.
Jeanette describes her dad as quiet, loved by church members, and considered a good friend outside of the home, but overall not very social. It's summer of 1986. Dennis went back to work as a traveling insurance salesman, and Jeanette went to live with her aunt and uncle in Oklahoma. It was the summer before her senior year. She couldn't take it anymore. Jeanette says the other kids suffered too. Not so much the youngest, the boy, but the girls? Yes. Work, scripture, obsessing over working out, running, and the girls. That's his main focus. That pretty much sums it up. His journal. It runs from December 1977 to November of 1989, and then skips to May 1992, right before his untimely death. I'm sure parts have been taken out, and Jeanette says her mother has told her she took out parts before handing it over. I only have a transcript that was done by Jeanette's brother after they got it back from the police department during Jeannie's poisoning investigation. She wanted them to see that Dennis wrote about having chest pains. Jeanette says the original writings reflect how he was at home during his episodes. Severe left slant on one page and severe right slant on the next. Jeannie says whatever troubles the kids had with their dad, it did not bleed over to their relationship.
Danny and I actually were a very loving couple. Even through all of this depression and all of this poverty and everything, there was a lot of times in the kids' teenage years that Denny and the kids and the girls just, they yelled at each other and they screamed at each other and so on. And I just hated it. And I didn't know what to do, and I didn't know how to get Danny to stop being the way he was being. Didn't know what to do with him. But there was never a time when he and I really had problems with each other.
She points out one speed bump.
There was a time way back, like maybe in our third year of marriage, when he was unfaithful to me one time. We got over it. It was in the past. It happened. We never talked about it again. It was over.
Throughout Dennis's journal, he focuses, like I said, a lot on working out and jogging. Jogged so many miles today, pushing the kids to jog, need to start working out and jogging again, back up to 6 miles 3 times a week. It's a running theme, so to speak. He also talks about dreams, impressions, after joining the church, speaking to the Spirit. These impressions and premonitions were nothing new. Jeannie says Dennis had them throughout his life. Jeanette has this in common with her dad, these dreams, impressions. Everyone I've spoken with, people who've known her for a long time, they always bring it up. I don't even have to ask. They're truly marveled by it. In November 1981, Jeanette was 13. Dennis writes that he thinks he'll die before he's 41. He's 36 at this point. He's imagining his kids a little older when he died. Talking about getting more life insurance, days later he flips to saying this, quote, "As I told Jeannie, and she has thought this too, Will and Jeanette are such perfect children that I fear we may not have them for long on this earth. It would be very lonely without them, as they are probably my 2 favorite people of all time." It matches with what Jeanette would hear from him growing up.
His brother had committed suicide, and ever since I remember when I was younger, he had this relationship with death that seemed to be nearby. He was always thinking about the other side. He had a very passionate abhorrence of suicide. He said it's the most selfish thing you could ever do to anyone. You should never do that. And he always thought, I'm going to die young. And so every once in a while, we would be doing something and he'd say, everyone, listen, I feel I'm not long for this earth. And I don't know if this was depression. I don't know what he was feeling. He happened to be right. He did die young. But he talked about it since I remember being young. So the fact that he did write about it in his journal at the end didn't seem out of the ordinary for me. I do think perhaps that someone was egging that conversation along a little bit more and started joining in on the idea.
So yeah, I've spent some time talking about these impressions and thoughts of early death, because it's something Jeanette, Jeannie, and Dennis himself have covered extensively in recorded conversations, emails, and Dennis in his journal. Is death something he brought on himself, never being able to shake the thought of dying at a young age? Or was it a convenient cover-up, excuse for someone to hurt him? Or did he commit suicide? However this shakes out, it's very apparent Dennis believed his dreams, his impressions. I can't help but wonder if that's what drew him to the Mormon religion. The thought of Joseph Smith getting a revelation from God through an angel and guided by visions to find a book inscribed on golden plates. It seems like that would have been something he could relate to and wanted to know more about. If visions were a constant in my life, I'd be curious. Finances are rough, always in a hole. 1983, Dennis says they are 4 months behind on rent. In his journal, he writes, "Why, Lord, does this continue?" Next time on The Toll. Poison, control.
Well, he was just throwing up after everything.
His food allergies were only later on in life, and that was that he just wasn't feeling very well.
Said no autopsy, no autopsy. He had heart problems. Why did Grandpa go into a coma right then? I don't know.
Thank you for listening. The Toll Podcast, Season 2, Poison Control, is a production of The Toll, LLC. Creator, investigator, host, and audio producer, me, Nancy Simpson. Executive producer, Pamela Shelby. Original intro and recording by Jay Lashley. Special thanks to Shelby Powers for assisting with web design and original brand identity. Music by Fesleyan Studios. Reproduction or any part of this broadcast without the express permission of The Toll, LLC is prohibited. Get updates at our website, thetollpodcast.com.